Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Friends, we've established a while ago that one of these superpowers is being a spy, that we think of that as kind of super heroic behavior. Well, what if you're a spy to solve a crime? That's like kind of like double. And what if it's all about going undercover? And what if you're an amateur who's never gone undercover before but has to because you're the only one who can do this job? And what if you're Ted Danson doing it in a show written by the folks who brought us The Good Place and many other such things? We're talking today about A Man on the Inside. It's a short little show on Netflix, 8 30-minute episodes. If you haven't seen it already, it's really a treasure. I pretty much adored it. I had one or two complaints that I'll bring up, but really it does so many great things about taking the mystery genre in a new way. But also, I mean, if you had any kind of hard Thanksgiving or just for whatever reason you need comfort show, this is like the ultimate, like just it's very much cozy television. Like it deals with hard issues, but it's just like everyone is just a fairly good person in the show. And it really brought up a lot of great issues about aging, about relationships between parents and children, about widow and sort of what happens after your partner passes away and how you find a new life for yourself, all wrapped up around this mystery that involves an elderly man who needs something to do, being hired by a private investigator to go undercover into a not a nursing home, but
Retirement community.
retirement community. Yeah, where it's kind of is what my step grandmother was in, an aging in place, where there are medical facilities for once you need them, but it can start out just as like, yeah, you just have an apartment here and there's a cafeteria and people do your laundry, but you pretty much live your own life. And it was just there was so much that the show did in the short 4 hours that it had, and Paul brought this to my attention and wanted to talk about it, and I'm here to talk about it too. So, Paul, let me just start by what made the show something you wanted to talk about.
Number one, I enjoyed it. And I think that, goes a long way in wanting to talk about something. Every now and then, maybe we talk about something I don't enjoy so much or enjoy some of, but think
Uh huh.
other parts of it are preposterously bad.
Yeah.
Maybe even something we talked about recently. But also, one of my recent pet peeves is just the abundance of overt ageism, really,
Mm-hmm.
that just pervades pretty much all levels of society or whatever, and
Right.
certainly Hollywood as well. And one of the things about ageism that I think is so interesting is it's not just like anti aged people, right? Like the older you are, the worse or whatever. There's also it really goes in all directions, where
Yeah.
there's ageism directed at young people, like children, and then young adults, and generations, which I kind of have to break out the quotes for, because
Mm-hmm.
they're a thing, but they're also not a thing, like
Yeah.
many things. um and going at each other, and these stereotypes for enormous groups of people that are by
Mm.
no means monoliths. And there's some reality to the situation, to the fact that when humans are born, like our brains are not that developed, and over time the body and the brain develop, and we gain information and we learn skills, and at a certain point some aspects of those begin to decline, but that point is different for different people. And the idea that that's inherently a bad thing, and
Mm-hmm.
is solely negative, and that is the defining feature of a person. I mean, it seems very ableist, right?
Yeah.
But then just also just the idea of just thinking so much about a person when you really only know one thing about them,
Yeah.
right? And so this show, I thought was really good in terms of representation in a broader sense, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of, you look at the cast and the characters, and it looks like San Francisco to me. It looks like Northern California. I mean, there's people in Sacramento. There's the East
Right.
Bay is involved a little bit, right? But a lot of that is sort of, to me, in the kind of the kind of subtle way where it's just
Mhm.
that's just there and it's not commented on. But then, because it's a retirement community, age is obviously discussed in a way that, like, within the show, in a way that doesn't feel like we're trying to make a point. It felt to
Yeah.
me more like just a show that was like, we want to portray life with real people, the majority of whom happen to be, between 70 and 90 or something like that.
Right.
Which is just very uncommon in television shows and in movies.
It really is, and I think that's true both just for shows that are just about people like, of this kind of senior citizen age, but also in stories about those folks and the generations under them, and like their kids or their grandkids, and that is certainly a part of this story. I'm going to give a brief summary. I'm not going to give away the murder mystery. I'm not going to give away the mystery ending until kind of a spoiler section at the very end. But for the most part, the plot doesn't matter. It's very much about just sort of like the experiences these people are going through.
Yeah, I would say the plot is non-central to the story, if that makes sense.
The plot is an exercise to give us these story moments, these character moments.
Based on a true story, though, by the way.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's this guy, Charles, whose wife has very recently passed away. We eventually learn it's from Alzheimer's, and that the last 6 months had been really hard, as it often is with Alzheimer's. And he's doing well. Like he seems to be medically in good shape. His memory is sharp, but he's retired and his wife has passed away and he's not doing anything. And he's kind of clipping out articles and sending them to his daughter, but not really communicating with her much. She is married and has 3 kids. Interesting, they're white. Her husband is Asian, and their kids are mixed. And really kind of a beautiful representation, I think, of that. Like you're in San Francisco in tech, like that.
Yeah, they're in Sacramento.
Sacramento,
and,
like,
and it goes completely uncommented on. That's one of my favorite things. That's just California.
He's a loving grandpa. They're loving grandsons. And they're between, like, I think 8 and 14, and they're kind of idiots. And
they're kids. They're teenagers. They do some dumb stuff, but they're just people too.
Yeah, all the characters feel real and nuanced. And I'll get to that in a second. Let me just finish the summary. So meanwhile, a woman has had something stolen from her. Her son is very concerned about this. Her son hires a private investigator to find out what is this crime happening in this retirement community, and is offering a huge amount of money to help. So the private investigator who they hire says, let's hire a kind of subcontractor, a man to be our man on the inside. And they do some interviews. They find Charles is a good choice, and they send Charles in. And Charles does some interesting stuff to figure out why why these thefts are happening. So it turns out there's multiple of them, and there's some interesting stuff about being a spy and being, mystery solving. This is a mystery show, and we'll talk about that to be sure. But along the way, he also has a lot of great sort of connections that he makes with the other people in the nursing home. There's a number of women who are interested in him and flirt with him. There's another guy who sort of sees him as a romantic rival because of that.
His sexual rival.
His sexual rival, as he points out many times. There's a friendship that he has with Dee Dee, who is the woman running all of it, who is, remember the actress's name. It's Rosa.
Rosa from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's Stephanie Beatriz.
Stephanie Beatriz, thank you. And it's by the same folks who've made Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The Good Place. And so a lot of those actors pop up, Parks and Rec. A lot of the actors who you've seen in those things pop up a bunch. I'm not going to give away who because it's fun cameos, but it's definitely a cool thing. And so there's some hijinks. His actual daughter finds out and like pretends to be the niece so that she doesn't get caught. He strikes up a good friendship with a guy who's there, but eventually his being the spy, the man on the inside, gets revealed. He's asked to leave, and there's tension and people are upset at him, but everything kind of works out in the end. And he doesn't go back. He doesn't stay in the nursing home, but he maintains friendships with people there. And he, by the end of it, is much more active. He's starting to lecture again. He was a former professor. He's developing friendships and doing things. He has a much better connection with his daughter, and they're connecting more and doing more things. He's coming to better terms with the loss of his wife and his feelings about that. And it all just kind of wraps up very nicely, but not in a like super saccharine. Like I said, like I had a sense of like, oh, he's going to decide to move in now, and it's like, no,
Right.
he doesn't need it by any
Yeah.
means.
Yeah. Yeah.
He stays friends with some of the folks in there, but
Yeah.
he's on his own. He's lecturing. He's working. Some people who felt like they were good romantic connections get together. Some people who you could see them as having good romantic connections don't, because not everything gets tied up
Right.
in nice little bows. And it's what struck me more than anything was just that it never painted in broad strokes. You know, and this is what I was kind of saying before, that like a lot of times it feels like the show is going to take one perspective of another. Either A, it's all about these old folks and they're ungrateful wretches of children who are super selfish, who are super mean, who don't care enough. When I'm always kind of wondering, like, so what did you do to those kids to make them not want to like come visit you all the time? Or it's all about the kids who are having to, not kids, I mean, they're people in their, you know, having adult lives.
The kids of the parents, but they're
Right.
adults,
Who are
adult
trying to leave
children.
their old lives, but like, you know, grandma's living in the spare bedroom and she's always driving you crazy. And like, it always feels very one-sided or the other.
Mhm.
And so to have this show where it was like, yeah, everyone's struggling, but everyone's doing their best. Even like there's a couple moments where the parents, the daughter and the son-in-law of Charles are struggling with their kids because their kids,
Yeah.
you know, all jump on a trampoline and all break bones within one day of each other.
Yeah.
And they're all like, oh my God, are we horrible parents or are these just terrible
Like,
kids? Because yeah, parents feel that way sometimes, but they
yeah.
get through it and they talk about it. And it just felt like it was really a story about people, none of whom were painted with a broad brush. Everyone whom had characteristics, you know, there's one or two who are kind of like, let's make them the foils of some parts of the stories,
Mhm.
in which case they're quite funny. But even then, like, there's some understandability to who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think above all else, it just feels to me like a show about people.
Yeah.
And, you know, the people are from a diverse range of ages. And,
Uh-huh.
you know, when you're a parent and you're not sure what's, you know, going on with your kids, or like, are you messing things up? Like, maybe one of the most helpful people to talk to could potentially be a parent. Might not be for everybody, you
Yeah.
know, but I think in the show we get the sense that they hadn't really talked in that way before, you know.
Yeah.
And then now that they're connecting about something else, you know, he's like, yeah, these things happen, you know. Like,
Yeah.
kids are gonna break bones, like, you know, just because your kid does something stupid doesn't mean they are stupid. It just means they did something stupid. And it doesn't mean you did something bad as a parent. Like,
Yeah.
you know, they're people. They make some bad decisions, they make some good decisions. And so yeah, just the treatment of kind of all the characters as people, I really appreciate it. And you know, this isn't a 30-minute comedy
Yeah.
dramedy. I don't even know, like, I think it's a comedy, right? But it's not like
Yeah.
a laugh out loud constant hijinks kind of comedy, you know.
Mhm.
It takes its time with things. But again, it's, you know, it's only up 8 episodes long, so it's, you know, it's 4 hours, and you've got to fit a mystery, you've got to fit personal development, and you know, you need a certain number of characters if you're going to have a mystery.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can't have 3 characters and, you know, one's a victim, one's investigating. It's like, well, it's probably the third person then.
Yeah.
You know. So but I did appreciate that Charles's new friend Calbert, like, had a thing going on himself with his son, you know,
Yeah.
that like they had their own thing, and that there were a lot of little things like that where you know, the characters had, most of them, not everybody had that much of a story, right? But
Mhm.
they got to have their part of the story as well.
Right.
Even while, you know, you have the needs of the plot and to move the
Yeah.
mystery forward and everything.
I think Calbert's story was one of my favorites, particularly because it was the one I felt like it would have been so easy for them to again paint with that broad brush, because his story is that he has a son who's incredibly successful in the tech world. He's black. Although again, that's never brought up. It's just kind of one more part of filling out the diverse world that these all live in. They're from Baltimore, and his son got a job in the Bay Area, and so had kind of suggested, maybe pretty firmly suggested, without really talking to his dad about it, that the father kind of move across the country to this retirement community so his son could be near him. And now the son has gotten offered a job in Singapore and wants to move to Singapore, and also is kind of in the same way, like, well, come on, Dad, I can find a retirement community for you in Singapore. And again, this could have so easily been a story about a dad who just doesn't want his son to succeed or doesn't want his son to outgrow him and wants his son to always stay close to him. Or it could have been about a son who is just a terrible son and just feels like his father's a burden and will take his father wherever he is because he cares more about his own need to be near his father than his father's actual needs. And it's not. Like, both of them resent each other a little bit because they haven't been communicating very well. And they kind of have a breakthrough, and Charles helps him. Like, Charles is that kind of character who helps most of the others have the breakthrough they need to fix their own stuff. And I think it's like they have the conversation, and the father kind of makes it clear, like, he has found a life for himself in San Francisco. And he's not going to hate his son or be mad at his son.
Yeah.
His career takes him. He's very proud of his son. His son does decide to not take that kind of new position and stay in a good job in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the father's clearly quite happy about that. But it never feels, again, like the son has to learn to not be terrible or the father has to learn not to be terrible. It's just two people in a tough situation, and they figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. They have to learn to understand each other, to figure out what they want, and then just to make their own decisions. Like, they both had agency in those decisions, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that's kind of what was important there in terms of their relationship, was that, that Calbert was like, no, I'm not going to move to Singapore. Like, I already moved across the country. I'm not going to move across the world. Personally, I might be like, yeah, that sounds fun. Check out Singapore. But also, he just made a new friend, and he, he seemed to be getting along well. So, the fact that his son decided to stay is nice, and I think makes the story feel a little warmer. But if he decided to move, like, that wouldn't have necessarily been bad or a horrible thing. It's like, his dad's well taken care of. He can still visit, like, just because you're both in San Francisco doesn't mean you see each other all the time.
Yeah.
That's, but they can go to some Giants games, maybe when the O's are in town. Try and figure out which orange and black uniforms are which.
Exactly.
The all Halloween baseball game.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it just feels like that's done, and I feel like that's done not only for the characters, but also for the very idea of the retirement community. And I've talked about this a little bit in regard to mental health, and I feel like the same thing applies here, which is that in both cases, there is a long history of both mental health facilities and elder care facilities being places of extreme neglect. And there being a real sense of kind of warehousing the people in society who we don't like and don't want to see and we don't want to be burdened by. And that's horrific, and a history that should be dealt with, and is true still in, both elder care and mental health care facilities all across the country still to this day. But it's not the majority. And I don't know if it ever was. It is certainly not the majority anymore. And it's getting better and better. And I know for myself, when my mother was, starting to really age and have problems, like, she made it very clear she did not want that in any way, shape, or form. And I think that, and granted, that was 10 years ago, and things have gotten even better since then. But, like, this portrays a retirement community as not like the perfect heaven on earth, but also not as hell on earth. It's just a nice place where you get to be with people and you don't have to cook your own meals anymore. And my mom would have hated that part probably, but also would have liked that she didn't have to do her own laundry. But I do think that my mother, like a lot of people of her generation, had gotten this idea that these places were horrible, and also that it was a sign that your children were abandoning you or abandoning your responsibility to you if for them to do that. And I think that's really harmful. And I don't blame my mother or the people of her generation. I think because she never saw TV shows like this. Like, everything she saw was about how horrible it was. And like, our family structures are very different. My father grew up in a home with his grandparents and his great-grandparents and a lot of his cousins. And like the whole family was living together. And when it's 8 adults and 4 kids, having one more adult who's kind of really needing medical help, That makes a lot of sense. When it's a nuclear family that very often has very little connections with other people, having, an older person in the house who needs a lot of medical care and attention is a lot harder. Doesn't mean it's not important, but it also doesn't mean that you're not a loving child or loving grandchild or whatever, or sister or brother, if you don't want to be that person or you can't be that person. So I just really appreciated that they kind of moved beyond the idea of that somehow children are doing something wrong by putting parents in places like this. I mean, just that phrasing of "I'm putting my parents there."
Right.
What's very clear is that in some cases the conversation was not as good as it should be, but that it's the parent and the child and the caregiver, whoever it is, mutually coming to the decision that this is what they should do, and that for the most part, the people in the retirement community are pretty happy about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I don't have a lot of experience with retirement communities. I
Mhm.
recently met someone who lives in something sort of like this. I guess it's a little different, who really doesn't like it, but
Yeah.
because they don't get along with the building manager, basically,
Right.
and like obviously anything like that, whoever's running the place, like getting along with them and having a good relationship with them seems pretty essential.
Yep.
As well as whatever staff there is. I know my mom for 2 years lived in a place that wasn't, it was like one of those like 55 and up communities or something like that, where
Yeah.
it wasn't a home, it was an apartment complex, but it was an apartment complex that was people all around her age range, and she liked it. She made
Yeah.
friends there. They had this food thing that was like where you could like they you would get food there and whatever. Not like a cafeteria, it's like a food bank thing that they did like once a week and whatever, and
Right.
local places would like donate to it. And but that's definitely not the same. I do have a couple of people, that one in the family and one a family friend, who went somewhere like that and then died very shortly thereafter of
Mhm.
COVID. And I mean, we know that hit very hard in those
Oh, very
places
much so.
during, right, early on, especially. And so, my only view is really as an outsider, and like, being aware of my own ignorance. And then from like watching the Golden Girls, where, Sophie is like, the home, say it, Dorothy, the home, like,
Yeah.
and Dorothy's like, Shady Pines, ma, like it's a threat, to
Yeah.
send her there. But then, then they have another episode where somebody goes to a worse place, but then they try and find a better place for her, with
Yeah.
acknowledging that like there's different kinds, but like also like in Frasier, where like his dad, the pilot is like, his dad's, I don't think he's even that old. I think maybe he's in his 60s or something, but he's his brother Niles is like, oh, there's this wonderful brochure here,
Mhm.
whatever it's called, we care, so you don't have to. Frasier's like, it doesn't say that.
Yeah.
It's like, it might as well. But the point being that like, what you're talking about, like, obviously that is the perception, I think,
Yeah.
among many anyway. And it's
A
good to hear that that's not the reality everywhere. Of course, any sort of facility or group or whatever, there's going to be
Yeah.
variation, right? Of course. And people are going to have different experiences even in the same place. But, I mean, because we can see that there's a couple people who really don't have positive experiences in this place,
Yeah.
but that's not necessarily the fault of the place. Maybe it's the fault of the person, or maybe it's just a bad fit sometimes,
Yeah.
or maybe it's that they never get a visitor. And like, if they were there, but then they got a visitor once a week or something, maybe they'd feel differently. Because then it feels less about like, oh, we're just stowing you away here, and
Right.
more like, well, this is where you live, and there's emergency services to take care of you.
Mhm.
There's food, so if you don't have to cook your food, some places also you can cook, right?
Right.
But then there's also a dining there. But like, if it's just a place you live, and then it has these additional services and these facilities, like, I think that feels very different than almost feeling like it's an institution, like a
Right.
prison, basically, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'll say two things there. One is that I should have brought this up before. I think it is very important to mention that like Charles clearly has a good deal of money, and there's a lot of like that. This is an expensive place.
yes,
And I think that probably again with both mental health and elderly care, the amount of money you're able to pay is not going to get like I am sure there are some Medicare only facilities that are quite good, and I'm sure there are some very expensive ones that are quite bad. But for the most part, the more you spend, the more you're going to get. And it
Yeah.
is like probably, you know, at the bottom rungs, I'm sure that for both mental care and elderly care, it is nowhere near enough. And that is a real problem in this country.
Yeah.
But no, I do think that it shows that, yeah, these facilities can be good. And the people who work there are often incredibly caring.
Yeah.
There's a really nice, there is a person who dies at one point during the show. And you really see it, the effect that it has, not only on her whole community, but on the staff.
Yeah.
And just this last weekend, it feels weird to say this because most of my life I didn't have a grandfather. Then I married Mary, and I all of a sudden had grandfathers. And one of them passed away, and we did the memorial this weekend. And a couple people, he was in an aging in place facility is what they call it, and he had started out being fairly independent, and he had his own kitchen and things like that, and then kind of eventually over time got moved to more of a real like a medical room where he's getting, you know, much more around the clock care until he eventually passed away. And I think we had like 4 residents and 3 members of the staff all came to his memorial service, and 2 of them were in tears. You know, you could clearly tell, you know, how much he was loved in that community. The other thing I wanted to say, because I think it's an ongoing issue throughout the show that I think they frame really well, that you kind of brought up, especially with COVID and stuff, is the idea of loneliness. And one of the things that is kind of the starting idea of the show is that Charles is quite lonely. And yes, he has his daughter, he has his grandkids, but he's not really connecting with them. You know, his wife was probably his wife and his work were the 2 things that really like brought him alive, and he doesn't have those anymore. And you talked about how COVID is really devastating in communities like this. And because our grandfather was in one, like he got moved in about a year beforehand. So we were very concerned about him. And from what I understand, I haven't seen too much of the data, but I've seen a little of the data. This is true. COVID, like itself, did an awful lot of damage and had a high mortality rate in nursing homes like that and in aging care facilities. But also the simple fact that because of the need to lock down, you couldn't have visitors.
Yeah.
That a lot of people just kind of faded and either came out with like brain function that was nowhere near as good, or you know, passed away at some point from something else, but in part because like they weren't fighting it. You know, they didn't have as much to live for because they did not have people getting to come to visit. And the place that Grandpa Chuck was in was really good because like we were able to like drop off a computer and they like fully, you know, sanitized it, but then taught him how to use it so we could video chat with him.
That's great.
I think a lot of places did something like that, but I'm sure other places didn't, you know.
Sure.
And we talk a lot about male loneliness, especially now in regard to like the election and younger people and stuff like that. And I don't think it gets talked about a lot in terms of older folks. And I think I was really touched by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, spoilers for the end, not what happens, but I mean, I guess this eliminates one of the suspects. But when Dee Dee, the head of the facility, finds out that Charles is a spy and that he was there under false pretenses for, you know, 30 days, and she resigns, and then he tries to convince her to stay, partially by saying, hey, look, you know, I was there under false pretenses, but like I really was lonely, you know, and you saw that, you know, like you see everything that's going on, and you know, even if you didn't know why I was there, like you knew what I needed, even when I didn't know what I needed, you know, and that loneliness really was a very bad thing for him. And, you know, he quite possibly would, even without any real health issues, like might die earlier if, you know, without a connection to anyone, you know, without really connecting with his daughter besides clipping newspaper articles. And even if he lived longer without interacting with other people, it would likely be a less fulfilling existence.
Yeah.
It's not just about how long you live. It's like what do you get out of it? What do you experience? What's your life like? And there's I don't think there's any reason that someone's later years or last years like need to be in solitude,
Yeah.
and don't need to be with only people of their own age. I mean, I certainly understand it can be harder to connect with people of different ages, on all sides.
Yeah.
But I've always felt it was worth the effort, and and having some people closer to your own age to be around to connect with, I think always does have some value. Like
Yeah.
it's not like those are the only people you can connect with, but those might be the only people who really understand certain things
Yeah.
about what you're going through, right? Or who are more likely to be able to relate to certain experiences. There's this great conversation about nouns, and
Yeah.
that Calvert initiates, and then Charles continues, and about just like starting to just lose nouns and be like, that thing, that
Yeah.
movie with what's his name and what's her name, and then they were both in that other film, what's it called, like, and that's an experience that you get a taste of maybe
Mhm.
at a younger age. I certainly have more of a sense for it now in my 40s than I did in my 30s and than I did in my 20s, but I also know, like, I don't experience it the same way my mom does in her 80s.
Yeah.
And that being able to talk to someone, having some connection to somebody with certain similar experiences, or just like a certain mass of experience, I think.
Yeah.
um
There's a couple things there. I want to just go back to what you said about the clipping out of news stories, because that I was kind of tearing up earlier. I think I'm okay now, but like that hit me really hard because that was something my mother did. She didn't literally do that, but she would like, she had a New York Times subscription and she would copy and paste things.
yeah.
She didn't quite ever find the forward button, but she would, literally just like take a screenshot and send that to me of an article and I, watching it, I was both like reminded of how much love there was in that, and had a kind of waves of guilt of like, did I respond to those enough? Did I not? And then kind of, went through some old emails and found that I did respond a lot and felt better about myself. But also, there's always a sense of like you could have done more. I think that comes with losing someone like that. But yeah, it just, that moment hit so hard because it felt so real. Because again, it's so clear that the daughter is not like, oh God, mom, I want you to never bother me again. She loves her father. She clearly wants to connect with her father, but she doesn't care about he's an architect, he's an engineer, and he sends her things about like interesting architectural facts about Belgian monasteries and
900-year-old Belgian monastery. She's like, that sounds so boring.
There was one part where he says to Kolber, his friend, hey, do you want me to tell you all about some interesting facts about the Golden Gate Bridge? He's like, no. And Mary, my spouse, was watching, was like, I want to hear some facts. So I Googled the facts and read them.
Nice. Yeah. Somebody should write his book, although I'm sure there's already a book about, or like 100 books about the Golden Gate Bridge.
For sure. I would say there's one little thing that bothered me, and it's become a trope in movies like this and TV shows like this that I don't love, but I do think it was handled a little more respectfully than it was before. But I wish we would just kind of get past this, which is as medical science improves, and I know, like, you look at any chart about like STI rates in a nursing home, and you'll see like you can find the exact moment when Viagra hits the market because sexuality in these places have greatly increased. And overall, that's good. The safer sex obviously needs to be taught. But we continue to find the sexuality of old people something to laugh at, particularly the sexuality of older women. And there's kind of a running gag of a couple women in the community who are very horny, and one of them has is coming on pretty strong to Charles, and he lets her down very gently with a like, he never kind of shames her in any way. He kind of explains that, he isn't over his wife who's passed on. And it's a very nice scene, but the show every time he talks about like the sexuality of the people around him, like the younger characters in his life, especially the private investigator, kind of like, oh, don't tell me about that. And it just struck a little bit as a wrong note to me, because it felt like, yeah, there's a time and place, and I totally get like boundaries, but the idea of particularly older women being like, oh, isn't it so funny that they're so sexual, or things like this. One makes a comment about Pedro Pascal and like how she's always having dirty thoughts about him, and both me and my spouse were like, yeah, same, I get it. But like, yeah, so that was kind of like my one sour note. But again, it's sort of like, of all the bad things people do that are kind of like ageist and like making fun of the elderly, this is so many steps better than anything else I've seen. I just would have wished that one was a little better.
Yeah, I mean, I could have done without that as well. I do think that is part of the reality of people of different ages interacting and having conversations about things,
Yeah.
like you could have the same, feel like I was watching something else and somebody was talking about, oh no, it happened so I totally hear what you're saying, and I get it, and I respect it, and I mostly agree.
Yeah.
But they turned it around also, though, where the daughter mentioned hooking up with like this kid of a friend of that, right?
He was showing a picture of like, oh yeah, remember that's like my friend's son when he was like 8. She's like, oh yeah, I hooked up with him when he was 17, when we were 17.
Yeah. And like he had a similar reaction of like, I don't want to hear that,
Yeah.
And so I do feel like, I mean, there's certain things that are common reactions that like you don't need to center, right? You don't like need to have them there. And so I do agree, like kind of playing it too much for laughs, I think is I don't think it's great, but at the same time, I also feel like it wasn't played that much for like, I feel like it was played for more than laughs, I guess is the way I would say it.
I think it would be much better to do this than to not address the topic at all. And like,
right.
At one point they mentioned like an older woman who like needs more batteries for her vibrator, and
right.
Yeah, that's great.
Sure.
It was things like the kind of like over aggressiveness of the women who are hitting on him.
Okay.
And like there's a scene where like they're having some machinery installed, and the men who are doing so are well built, and the two women are kind of like scoping them out. And it felt like the show was laughing at them instead of celebrating in a humorous way that they're still sexual and still enjoy the sight of people they're attracted to. So
I would say in that scene I didn't feel that, like,
that's fair.
But the other ones where there were reactions from a third party, I feel that kind of,
that's fair. That's fair. So let's talk about the mystery of it all. And I know you're someone who, like, I really love mysteries. We haven't talked about them too much. What do you love about mysteries, and how do you feel about the way that this handled the mystery?
Yeah, so I love puzzles in the first place. Anything where there's like an answer and you need to think to figure it out. Like I actually just made a book called 1001 Easy Sudoku Puzzles for my mom, where I literally assembled 1001 Sudoku puzzles for my mom, and then I put them into a book because I was like, well, if I'm going to put these on a sheet for her anyway, I might as well. But so like I've just always really been into puzzles. I love chess puzzles, and mysteries are this like, they're like people puzzles, It's like not just about figuring, like there's some artifice involved in composing a mystery and displaying it and throwing some red herrings in there. And so sometimes I can solve a mystery by just thinking like, well, they wouldn't have had it be this. If it were this person, they wouldn't have had this scene, or they're putting this in here for this reason. And I prefer not to do that too much because I think that kind of takes away from it a little bit, but it's really hard not to, like it's hard not to think about the writing usually while watching something. I think with this, I didn't that much though, which is really a testament to great writing, I think, is when You know, it's like an umpire or a referee in baseball or in a sports game. It's like, if you don't notice they're there, they're doing a good job.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, so it just in general, in terms of mysteries, I love the kind of people puzzle. I love cozy mysteries, especially more than kind of the, more hard boiled or whatever, but
Right.
all sorts of mysteries. This one, I loved the mystery. I suspected correctly in maybe the second episode, I
Uh-huh.
think. And then it took a couple more episodes to really figure out exactly what was going on, not just like kind of who it was. But I thought it was. Are we going to say what happened now?
I think we can. I think we're gonna have a bit of a spoiler section here. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna say who the person is, but when I will kind of say it a little bit broadly. So spoiler in kind of 3, 2, 1. And I'll say I predicted this from the first episode because
Okay.
my first wife worked in nursing homes for a long
Ah,
time
yeah,
as a little nurse.
yeah,
And one thing she told me is that at least every week someone reports something stolen.
yeah,
And well, yes, well, like in the 3 years she worked at a place like that, once there was an actual stolen item.
yeah,
Most of the time, it's that you have a lot of people with a lot of memory issues
yeah,
who either can lose things or who can take something from someone else because they think it's theirs. And in the end, it turns out that it was someone who would like. They talk in the show about how once you start to have real memory loss issues, you go to a different part of the facility, and that's
yeah,
kind of like people are a little like scared or nervous of that. And it winds up being like, and again, this is very much the cozy part of it, someone who's not maliciously stealing, but is just getting confused about, she sees things that remind her of things she owned many years ago,
yeah,
thinks they're hers and takes them.
yeah,
And yeah, I saw that coming, but then I did think they did some good. For a while I thought it was going to be the staff, and then they thought it was going to be the staff in an early episode. It's like, okay,
right,
cool, so it's a red herring, that's
right. So
fine.
then it won't be the staff. Exactly. That's where
And
the
then I kind of
article.
got so caught up in the stories and the
Yeah.
people that I kind of forgot. I was like, oh right, there's a mystery here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, it's like he forgot too, right?
Yeah.
Like he was there doing, his friend died, like, and then he's like, well, I've got to go to Sacramento and just do anything but be here with this grief.
Right.
And so he basically bailed on the case at some point, not on purpose, but like out of sort of like self-defense, self-preservation, like,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, so I thought it made sense. So I mentioned before there's a Chilean documentary.
Mm.
I forget the name. I'm sure they reference it here, but where this guy, yeah, the mole agent.
Uh-huh.
That's not the original name. It's in Spanish, but it like basically this guy did this. He went into a retirement community and like tried to investigate something undercover and found out, that one of the things that was going on was something like this. And obviously this is a fiction series. It's not
Right.
a direct adaptation or anything. But that's the inspiration for it, that like something like this happened. And, as you're saying, like it's not an uncommon thing to happen, that,
Right.
somebody takes things that, aren't theirs, but they don't know that, they don't,
Yeah.
you know, maybe don't know where they are. Like, and so to me, it also made sense that like he solved it because he had experience with that.
Right.
If you think about it too hard, like maybe it's like, shouldn't the people working there, like maybe Dee Dee could have solved it, but it's like, okay,
Mhm.
okay, it's like it, but it just, I thought it was just a really nice mystery, because it's like most of the mysteries I watch or read are murder mysteries,
Right.
like and a bunch of people get killed there, and like people are dying here already. Like we don't
Yeah.
need a murder, and not every mystery has to be a murder. Not every mystery has to be malice. Like sometimes it's just something happened and we don't know what happened, and we want to try and figure it out.
Right.
And and that pervades life in all sorts of things. I mean, that's what science is basically, is trying to figure out what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I just thought it was a
I just want to say on
nice,
that, and
yeah.
I think we live in a world today where we are very quick, and I hold myself to this as well, to associate malice to any decision of someone else that we don't like or any
Hmm.
action that we don't like.
Yeah,
And I think there is a lot of malice in the world today, but I also
sure.
think a lot of the times it's, you know, I am working with this set of facts, and so I judge your action with that. But if I remember that you are working from a completely different understanding of the facts of the situation, your action takes on a very different tenor, you know?
Yeah,
And we can talk about like why do you have a different set of facts or why do I have a different set of facts or whatever, but like still it's you know, I think that this is a great example of that. Where like, yeah, there's no malice whatsoever, but of course everyone jumps to that. And
right.
I'm kind of glad that they didn't show this, but I will say that one thing that I think is frequently a reality of these situations, certainly were in the places that my ex-wife worked at and a lot of the others that friends of mine worked at, in unfortunate reality, and not this is true of all, but like that often older white folks will wind up blaming the staff, who's
Mm.
often people of color,
Yeah,
for things disappearing and stuff like that. And like, again, we didn't need that in this, you know, but
right.
it is a reality. It's worth mentioning, but because also it's not the case and a lot of times it is like grandma forgets that she sold something or gave it to someone else, and then
Yeah,
assumes that like, you know, the Hispanic maid sold it or what, or stole it or
right.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that dynamic was present, right? Like Dee Dee's Latina, and
Yeah,
you know, a
true.
lot of the I mean, the staff is representative of the
Yeah.
region. I'd say, you know, it's I mean, it's a diverse staff, but like the 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 main suspects were not white folks, you know,
Yeah.
and that wasn't brought up, but I did feel that, you know, and I
Hmm.
kind of felt like because of the show and the feel of the show, I was like, therefore they probably didn't do it. You
Yeah.
know, like his friend Calbert is black, and I'm like, and his son's black, and I'm like, they probably didn't do it
Yeah.
because you know, like it would feel like it would feel worse, and like ultimately, like you should be able to have anyone be guilty or be the cause of whatever, you know, like
Right.
in a better world. But you know, stories are viewed within the world in which they're made, and our world has a lot of um you know, racism and other various bigotries, and so having a story where that wasn't, you know, where I feel like the viewer could bring their own prejudices, you know,
Right.
and I'm sure many do. And there's at least one other show where I remember watching and someone be like, oh, they're gonna have the black guy be like the, you know,
Hmm.
the bad guy here or whatever. I was like, just keep watching the show, like, you know, but they obviously played on that
Yeah.
stereotype or um that bias of people to sort of misdirect. And here I don't think they were doing that like super deliberately or anything,
Hmm.
you know, but that was there. And it, you know, it made the actual resolution more of almost like a relief, you know. That was
Yeah.
like, okay, there's not any, because I feel like if it had really been a real theft, like a deliberate theft, it would have undermined the, I'm not saying this is like the message of the show, but it's a message that does come from the show, is like these places can be nice and good, you know,
Yeah.
and good for most of the residents. Not everybody, it's not going to be a perfect fit for everybody, but like the goal is to help people, and by and large they're doing a good job of that.
No, I think that's true, and I actually thought you were going to go a little bit of a different direction, but I think it's very similar. Of that, because to me, I think that's the message. But also, a real big part of the message is, yes, there's shitty people out there, but most people are fundamentally good
Hmm.
to some extent or another, and a lot of their conflicts, even where they're kind of being not great people,
Yeah.
there's probably some misunderstanding or some reason behind it, you know. And like the guy who's kind of like the you know, erotic rival of our character, like, yeah.
Sexual rival.
And he kind of like he's very toxic masculine, and he's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
kind of like possessive. He's also dying of cancer.
yeah.
And like that's never presented as an excuse, but it's also like this guy's kind of like, yeah, I'm just gonna do what I know. I'm not gonna try and change. I've got 6 months left. And in one of my favorite moments, because I remember something my mom fought about a lot, you know, like I, my mom could have probably lived 15 years longer than she did. She chose, and part of it is because she was an addict, but also like she could have eaten healthier. But she kind of made a conscious decision of like, in her words, like she could live 20 years eating rabbit food, or she could live 10 years more eating the food she really loved. And there's a scene where, again, this guy is dying of cancer and he wants to go smoke a cigar, go buy cigars. And one of the people at the home, one of the staff, isn't comfortable doing that because he knows that doing that, like every cigar he smokes, is gonna like speed up the clock on whatever time he has left. And Dee Dee both doesn't like tell the staff member, like, no, you have to go, like she validates the staff member's feelings, but make sure that the staff member understands like that is their concern. It's okay to not want to participate, but that she's going to take him shopping for the cigars herself because she fully honors the choice that this guy's making of saying like, yeah, if I can have 4 months with cigars or 5 months without, I'm going to keep smoking cigars. Yeah. And other people don't want it. My father's the exact opposite. He has cut out more and more things out of his diet and he's in great shape and will probably live well into his 90s, if not hit 100. And I think his choice is just as valid as my mother's. But yeah, so just, that one little moment really like touched me, and I was like I'm so glad they included that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and then she kind of talks him out of getting the cigar.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I guess that's true.
But not in a like in a deeply manipulative way, but not in a like empathetically manipulative way though. You know? So it wasn't.
You're right.
Like,
I kind of didn't love that part. I kind of forgot about that, but yeah.
But like she drives him there and it's his choice. You know, she doesn't say you shouldn't do this, you know,
or I won't let you or something like that.
Right. Yeah. She's like, this is your choice. But you know, they talk about some stuff and he's like, yeah, maybe I won't do this. Like, maybe I would rather spend time, you know, maybe I would rather have more time. Yeah. Like, and that to me, the part that matters is that that's his choice.
Right. It's his agency because like, if either of the staff members have been like, no, I'm not going to do that, then it's not his choice.
Yeah. And like, I don't think all manipulation is necessarily bad. Like, you know, I mean, people can make a number of different choices, and there are ways, I think, of leading people to make better choices without leveraging something or guilting them or, you know, like her point wasn't really so much like, you owe this to, you know, Virginia, you know, who you're marrying. It's not that you owe this to anybody, but it's that you could do this and this could be like your gift to her, kind of. Right. You know, because he's kind of trying to figure out like, what can I even do to console her? You know, her best friend just died. Yeah. And it's like, well, not dying might be helpful, you know? Yeah. And like, I don't know. So you know, I mean, it's encouraging people to make healthier decisions, I think, is something that I appreciate and support. But the difference between encouraging someone to make healthier decisions and basically telling them, if you make any other decision, that's not a valid choice. I think those are two very different things.
I want to push back a little bit on your use of the word healthier there, because I think that,
I mean, literally. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of physical health, yes. Yeah. I think that there are times in which emotional health and other kinds of health matter a lot more. And I just, there's a lot of really problematic language around like what is or is not physically healthier that I know that's not what you necessarily mean, but that I think is wrapped up in that. But I do agree with your general concept. Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's she offers him a different way to understand the choice he's making. Yeah. Without trying to tell him what choice to make.
Yeah, exactly.
Just on the subject of mysteries though, I think I've talked about this on the show before, but not for probably a couple of years now. My favorite set of novels are about a character named Matthew Scudder, by Lawrence Block. And they're much darker books. They're like there's always a murder. There's always like, you know, some danger. There's always high stakes.
It's Hell's Kitchen, right?
Yeah, they help. Well, I mean, one of the biggest, in the same way that Baltimore is a character in The Wire, New York City, and especially Hell's Kitchen, as it becomes Clinton, is very much a character in the book. And I feel like for people who want to understand, like my knowledge of New York, the books go from 1975, which is like right before I was born, till the early 2000s, or about when I left the city. But like, the thing with the character is he's an alcoholic and he is in treatment. And as the books go on, he's better and better. But especially early on, he really he's fighting tooth and nail to not take another drink. And he solves mysteries as a way to like keep himself busy. And as part of that, he goes on a lot of like psychological journeys, and every book is about some different step. Not like that each book is the 12 steps, but like they're always about some different part of his recovery and some way that he's dealing with life. And the murder mystery is often like they're often quite good and well done, but they're never the most important part of the book. It's a character study where the mystery is kind of the plot device to kind of take us along. And this is very different in tone and feel, but it felt very much that same way. We're like, yes, there's a mystery, and yes, I love it. But I also feel like if you've decided to keep listening now and you haven't seen it, I think that you can go in knowing the mystery and still love this.
Yeah.
In a way that a lot of other mysteries, like I've never seen The Sixth Sense because I know the spoiler.
We were at the Mayfair and someone said what happened. At least I was. I think you might have been there. Yeah, right? And then I saw the movie like 10 years later and I was like, what was the point of watching this movie? Like, I already know. I won't even say it here because I respect maybe somebody doesn't know and they can go see it.
Yeah.
And hopefully they haven't listened to the song Jizz in My Pants. But because it has a spoiler for it. But like, you know, I really appreciate that I got to see The Usual Suspects without knowing what was going on. That, you know, knowing a mystery, like certain mysteries. I mean, the Sixth Sense is like really, it's just such a certain types of mysteries especially when it's such a twist thing or whatever, I think really don't play that well without the mystery being a mystery. Whereas, you know, I think you can see Empire Strikes Back and like already know whether or not Vader is Luke's father and like you'll be okay. You know?
Exactly.
I personally generally prefer mysteries where the mystery is really central and the detective doesn't go through a bunch of personal crap and they're like a person who, this is what they do. They solve mysteries. They're like the constant through line through a series of mysteries. But that's not what this show was. This show, it wasn't about someone going through a bunch of personal crap. It was about life, you know, and then there was a mystery there that was like, you know, kind of the construct for that.
And we're going to talk more about mysteries and our bonus content for members, which, by the way, if you're not a member yet, for only $5 a month, $55 a year, you get to become a member. With that, you get ad-free content, you get bonus content, you get a lot of other great stuff, and you get to help us keep the lights on. So if you haven't done that yet, please think about becoming a member for only $5 a month. And we're about to wrap up. Paul, any other kind of last things you want to say about the show?
I just enjoyed it. You know, I don't know. I didn't make a list of things I wanted to talk about. Basically, I started watching the show, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to get my mom to watch this show. So I watched the show with my mom, and I saw it because Lee was watching it. And then I was like, oh, what's this? And actually, I ended up watching it partially because Lori Tan Chin is in it, who plays, she's the president of the council, of the resident council. But she's in another show that I enjoy a lot that I don't think you made it through. I didn't think it was quite your brand of humor necessarily. Nora from Queens. She plays the grandmother in that show. And one of the things I love about that show is her in that show and how much of a character she gets to be as the grandmother. Like, and there just throughout history have not been enough characters who are like important to a story and really get to be full people over the age of 60, you know, unless maybe they're old white men and they're like a politician character or lawyer or something like that, you know, but
or they're the Mr. Miyagi or the, you know, the wise old person who's often a person of color, like the magic, you know, etc. Trope or something like that. But you know, you're right. Like, who get to be fully actualized characters instead of talking plot devices. For character growth for our younger characters.
Yeah, and like, I love Mr. Miyagi. You know, I think he's the best character in The Karate Kid. But like, you know, first of all, that's not a super common thing, and like, you know, the older character as plot device is the main place you see them or have.
Right.
And I think it's been getting better over
Yeah.
the years. You know, I mean, we did the episode on the Golden Girls, which was like an outlier in its day.
Mhm.
But I do think it's continued to, I think Netflix has had a lot of shows with older characters. And I mean, even something like the Book of Boba Fett, like,
Yeah.
it's an action show where, you know, they're in their 50s, and maybe Tamora
Morrison, I think, was
60.
62, and Ming-Na Wen was like 57.
So, yeah, something like that. And you know, it's just nice to see, because it's like everybody should get to play an important character, like no matter what age you are. And so it's just nice to see more of it. And I just really enjoyed the show. And you know, when you were like, can you do a podcast tonight? I was like, yeah, if you'll watch 4 hours of this show. And you got through it. So
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we had a couple other episodes planned. I really want to do something on Prey, which I don't know if you've seen. It's another retelling of the Predator story, but set in a Native American community, like just at the start of where white people are coming into it. And I had a lot of fun watching it. I have a lot of good thoughts on it. Mostly I was like, it is so cool that they did such a good version of the Predator movie in this community in a way that was really honoring and authentic to that community. I still don't like Predator movies, but I still thought it was great. So we want to do something about Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. We'll see where those go. But yeah, thank you, Paul, so much for stepping in last minute. Hope you folks enjoyed all of this. We'll have a lot more to say about mysteries and spy stuff, or not a lot, but a little, in our bonus member content. For everyone else, thank you so much. We have spoken. Welcome back, members. So, Paul, on this sort of scale of like mystery as plot device to mystery as the whole center of everything, where would you put the Knives Out movies?
Oh,
because I feel like they're in many ways kind of, for me at least, those are the perfect balance, because the Daniel Craig character is fairly like a solid character who's not going on a character journey of his own.
Yeah.
We get a lot of great character work from all the people around them, and wind up getting very into the dramas and interpersonal connections and him learning about them to help figure out the mysteries. But it's not just like all forensic evidence and stuff. Like, it's very much character studies, but also where the mystery is really central. What do you think about those?
So Knives Out, the movie that was called Knives Out, I loved. I thought it was great. It largely redeemed Ryan Johnson in my eyes. And I was like, okay, I really didn't like one of your movies. I really liked this movie. I think it was a mystery first movie, but was. Yeah. I think it was a mystery first movie that tricked you into thinking it wasn't until like the second or third act. And it was like, oh, by the way, this has been a mystery, even though we told you it's actually a thriller. Right. Like, they basically were genre flipping, like act to act, which I thought was brilliant and brilliantly done. And I kind of knew some of what was going on, but definitely didn't really have the whole picture, you know?
Yeah.
And so I do think of that as a murder mystery. Like, that's what it was at its core, but with a genre twist, basically. And I do think that the character stuff was great, but I regard the character stuff in that movie as secondary to the plot. Mm-hmm. I think that is very, very firmly a plot-driven movie. I felt pretty much the opposite about Glass Onion, which I largely hated, but really enjoyed. Okay. Yeah, really enjoyed certain parts of it and things about some of the characters and whatever. Certain things were funny. Certain things that I think were supposed to be funny, I really didn't think were funny. Yeah. Like that whole mask thing and the shooting in the mouth with the spray. I was like, what are you even doing? You know, yeah, but that's fair. But I found that I felt like the mystery was like tertiary to the story, even. You know, I almost feel like the characters were secondary and the like social commentary was primary. And I would say that's an example of And I think I might have been tempted to use these two movies. First of all, I was thinking about these movies, particularly Glass Onion, when we were talking about how A Man on the Inside has that mystery as kind of a secondary thing.
Yeah, that's part of why I went
sure.
here, because I figured it's a very natural connection.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I'm just saying I was on the same page, right? Yeah, exactly. Glass Onion felt to me like it's the kind of social commentary bearing movie or show that to me is like overbearing, where it feels like somebody wanted to say something and then they thought, okay, how can I say this?
Right.
You know, and it just, I didn't like spending time with a lot of the characters. You know what? I don't want to talk about what I didn't like about it. That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is kind of where the mystery sat in it.
Right.
And, you know, it felt like almost like it wasn't really a mystery because, I mean, as soon as they go to the island, it's like, okay, either that guy's going to be the dead guy or he's going to be the guy who did it. Like those were the two options. It was like there was no in between. And then once he wasn't dead, it was like, oh, he's the murderer. Right. Spoilers for the Glass Onion. Yeah. But I definitely felt like we also weren't given a lot of information, which makes a mystery not really a mystery. It makes it something else, you know? And so, yeah, I think I feel like those two movies are very different in terms of where the mystery sits within the story. But the first one, I think, is a mystery masquerading as a thriller. And I think the second one is basically social commentary masquerading as a mystery, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that all makes total sense. And I think it kind of helps illustrate the different ways we see mystery, because I loved the second. I love Glass Onion. I think Knives Out is even better. But frankly, Knives Out, I think, was focused on the mystery. You're right. And I was annoyed that it was, because I like the rest of the movie so much more than the mystery.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
And to me, it's interesting you say a thriller. And granted, I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but to me, it's not, I don't think it was a thriller at all. I think it was a family drama and a family study. And it's really interesting, like it takes this outside figure to kind of like uncover all the different resentments and dramas and feelings around this family when the clan patriarch really has kind of passed away.
Right.
And everyone's kind of blaming each other and this focus around money and stuff like that.
Yeah. Died violently. Oh, yes. Just like a side note, the phrase passed away, like just makes me twitch.
That's fair.
With rage. But like, and I understand like people are going to express things how they want to. And this isn't about you. This is about like reading headlines and everything. I'm just like, it's just like a George Carlin thing, you know? Yeah. And like when somebody's 90, 95 and they go to bed and they don't wake up and you want to say passed away, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
When somebody literally like what did he do? He like, I'm trying to remember right? Didn't he like stab himself? He like,
if I remember, because she accidentally gives him the wrong pills.
Yeah.
He's going to die.
Yeah.
And so he like stabbed. Yeah. He violently ends his life.
Yeah.
In response to the fact that he's going to accidentally violently lose his life.
Exactly.
Well, not violently, but basically poisoned.
Yeah. So that's where the phrase passed away to me, it just feels, particularly, but yeah. So the reason I'd say it's a thriller, I think the setting is a family drama, you know?
Yeah.
But I think the genre in the beginning is a thriller because it's the, I've seen a definition of a mystery as a story where the protagonist is one step ahead of the reader, and a thriller is a story where the reader is one step ahead of the protagonist. Like, what's around the corner, Yeah. And so here we know how she's being pursued, and, she's basically running from getting caught because she thinks she's guilty. Right. And it turned out she almost accidentally saved him, but then trying to save her from accidentally killing him, he killed. Oh, it's
very convoluted.
But it's a great plot though. I really think it's like kind of Agatha Christie-esque, where it has, it's just, I feel like it's a brilliantly plotted movie,
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to write a lot of brilliantly plotted mysteries.
Yeah.
There's only so many authors who really, a huge number of murder mysteries are just, I mean, often when people call something a cozy, they're talking more about the feel, right?
Right.
But that's true with Hard Boiled too,
Yeah.
And so I think whether something is more plot based and more like really trying to solve it, and that's the joy of reading it,
Right.
or whether it's more, mysteries lately have gotten more, the detectives tend to go through these character journeys and things change, and it's more about their
Mhm.
life outside of the mystery. But I my mom worked with someone that then I worked with who used to go home and read a mystery a day. Like, he would
Yeah.
just go home every night and read a murder mystery. And my mom was like, "Well, don't you want to like take some time to try and figure it out?" He's like, "No, I just read the rest to see what happened." Like,
Yeah.
and so it's like, but these were also mysteries that most people, or many people, would read with the main purpose of like trying to solve it. And he was
Yeah.
just like, "No, I just read it like it's,
Yeah.
like it's an action book or something." It's like, "Oh, okay." So I think the same story can be enjoyed in different ways by different people.
Yeah. And like one thing I like about those Matthew Scudder books is they kind of approach it from a number of different angles. Like there are some that I think are very well done mysteries where about halfway through the plot there's a couple of suspects and you're like kind of the detective is maybe one step ahead of you, but you feel really satisfied. You're like, yes, I figured it out too.
Yeah.
There are other books where he has a very good sense of who did it by like the second chapter, and the story is about him figuring out, can I get enough evidence to like convince anyone else that this guy did it,
Yeah.
And then other times it's like, we know who did it, but he has like kidnapped someone, and like the question is now like, can we figure out how to find him, or how to get leverage over him or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all fun. Any other last mysteries you want to recommend people check out from the TV shows or movies?
Yeah, while we're talking about Netflix mysteries, and Matthew Scudder, I'm going to re-recommend a show that I watched a couple years ago when it came out, and reminded me of Matthew Scudder, or at least I tried to tell you it was similar, even though I've never read a Scudder mystery.
Yeah.
Called Velasco Aran, PI. It takes place in Mexico City. It's in Spanish. It's Pablo Ignacio something or other. I don't remember his whole name. Taiba, I think.
Yeah.
They're set in the mid 70s, late 70s, in Mexico City, which, has a vibe similar to like Hell's Kitchen. I mean, not all of Mexico City, obviously, but the part that they show, it's this,
Right.
kind of urban, kind of, gritty. And it's got some humor. The mysteries are interesting, but not necessarily. I'd say that the mysteries are fairly central, but like the vibe is
Right.
big too. The feel of them, like what beverage he drinks, and like, and what he eats are like part of the story, in a meaningful way, I think. I'm actually listening to it now in audiobook. But I would recommend that series. It's like 3 episodes.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I think I'd recommend one that oddly also features for its time one of the only shows besides Golden Girls in which an older woman was the starring character, Murder, She Wrote.
Yes.
And Murder, She Wrote to me is very emblematic of the 80s kind of formulaic murder novel, really set to television, because the character had growth over the seasons, but for the most part was a static, like interesting character. And there were like other people in her town who you got to know more and who she had relationships develop with.
And like half of whom got killed because it was a town of like hundreds of people.
Yeah, which was having like a murder rate was like 15% a year. Like,
yeah, so high. Such a violent town.
But yeah, like I have not watched Murder, She Wrote in 30 years. But I'm fairly certain that if I turned on an episode, like I would watch it with my mother who loved murder novels and murder mysteries, and she would always really enjoy, like we would like a lot of times we would like tape them, and we would like pause before the last act and like
Oh,
debate, like, okay, was it this guy? Was it that guy? Like,
yeah.
whatever it was, which was a lot of fun. And half the time one of us was right, and half the time neither one of us got it right. But like,
Nice.
I think those stories hold up. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. There might have been a lot of like, casual racism or something like that. I have no
I mean, it
idea.
was 80s television, network
Yeah.
television. I'm sure there was all sorts of things that
But-
you look back and
yeah.
go,
But it was
But who
Angela
knows?
Lansbury. I think she was probably in her 60s or 70s. Still a very beautiful woman, but not framed as anything but a woman of her age. But a woman who was kind of like Charles, like, yeah, I'm a novelist, but I'm just bored. I'll help solve mysteries.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I have two more things I have to say.
Go for it.
First of all, Angela Lansbury lived in my building growing up.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Second of all, my mom and I would watch that every Sunday night, and we only had the commercial break to try and figure it out or say who we thought it was.
Yep.
There was no TiVo or whatever yet then. But yeah, I loved the series. I definitely would like to rewatch some of it. And then mentioning that made me think of Only Murders in the Building, which is another mystery show that has two older characters, one younger character. I find quite enjoyable, although similar to Murder, She Wrote. If the buildings, if it's only murders in the building, well, depending on how many seasons you go, that building's gonna have a pretty high murder rate too.
Yeah, this show that we started with, A Man on the Inside, felt very inspired by Only Murders in the Building. Like, it felt like someone had been like, all right, we need another show about an old people who solve mysteries, and someone was like, I don't think they wrote this for that, but someone was probably like, hey, I've got a pitch for you. I've been trying to get this movie made for a while, this TV show made for a while.
Yeah, I think it's the sort of thing where the success of one made it easier to get the other green lighted.
Exactly.
Greenlit?
Greenlit, yeah.
Yeah.
Last question that I'll ask, which is that there's an epilogue kind of in the credit. I don't think it's post credits necessarily, but it's like at the very end where you think the show is over, and it's we don't know any of the details, but something else has happened.
Oh,
yeah. The same PI has gotten another call, and they're like, "Oh God, he's the only one. Hey Charles, do you want another mystery?" And in a great, he's like, "You don't have to say anything more. I'm in." Yeah. He hangs up,
and he puts in his pocket square.
Yes. But yeah, so do you think that means they're setting up for another season? And do you want to see another season?
I felt like that was a perfect stinger.
Yeah.
Where it was basically saying, this isn't the end of him doing stuff like this. Maybe we'll come back with another season, but we're not giving you a cliffhanger where if we don't tell you what this was about, you're going to feel really disappointed and let down.
Yeah.
So I would say if they make another season and they make it as well as this one, I will enjoy watching it.
Yeah.
If they make another season and it's not as good, I'll watch it and I won't enjoy it. If they don't make another season, I'll be okay. But do I think it's a show that's worth making another season? Yeah, especially if you have some mystery that doesn't take place in the same exact location, where at least their murder rate's still low,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's potential to make another good season, but I don't view it as a necessity. And to me, that's perfect for a show. Any show like Andor is maybe my favorite show of all time, but I have trepidation about there being a second season because how could it possibly be as good as the first season? You know what I mean?
I hear you. I mean, like season 3 of The Wire, our favorite character dies. And
man.
And then season 4 is so good.
I know. And then season 5 is like, it's good. It's good, but
I think I felt the same way. To me, it wasn't good, we're going to get a second season. It was everything else in the last 10 minutes is establishing the new life Charles has and that he is better connected with his daughter. You see him at home kind of like streaming, playing Mario Kart type game with his grandsons, and that's really fun. Yeah. He's having lunch with Charles. He's lecturing at museums. I don't know, maybe every 6 months he's going to solve another murder, and then fun. Yeah. But I didn't feel a need of give me that second season.
Mm-hmm.
Which is funny because a lot of times Netflix is famous for canceling shows when they need 1 or 2 more seasons to finish.
Right.
In this case, I feel like there was so much of capturing lightning in a bottle with this. It was such the perfect setup that I think if I heard there was a second season, I would have trepidation because I'd worry that you couldn't capture that all again. But yeah, especially if it was like, okay, this time it's like, hey, can you maybe get some guest lectures at this university? Because there's been a weird series of like, someone stealing each other's manuscripts among the professors, something
Sure,
like that.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
make it very different.
Yeah, I agree. And like, I don't want the same character journey. I don't want to go backwards to the same thing and then have the same thing,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like, I would be happy if a second one was kind of just him doing his new thing,
Yeah.
and that being, maybe he meets someone or something and they don't make a bunch of jokes about her being horny or whatever. But like,
Yeah.
but and then it would be about him kind of moving on or whatever. But I don't think it has to be that. I'd be happy for it not to be.
I'll say one last thing. I should have said in the main episode. I might even edit this back in, but I'll just say one last thing and let you respond, and then we'll close. The one other thing that I really loved is there's a character beat where, again, this issue of memory loss is really important to him, and there's a character who's going through it, and he very clearly is affected by it because of what he saw happen to his wife. And there's a moment when he tries to like basically be a white knight and rescue her and do the kind of things that he did for his wife that helped her a lot for this woman who he barely knows. And I think I wouldn't have liked it if it had worked. And if it had been like this wonderful thing, because instead she's like, I don't really know you. I don't really know why you're doing it. And it feels forced because it is forced, because he's using her, not in a bad way, but like he's dealing with the trauma of losing his wife and is kind of like processing that with his new person. And it's clear that like, it's not working the way he'd want, but the staff is doing their best. Other people are doing their best. And he has to kind of learn to let that go. And it was one more moment where I was like, this could have so easily gone into a saccharine way that so many shows do. And they didn't make him look like a monster for trying or her like a monster for rejecting it. It's just, this isn't the connection they have. And that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they do form a connection that's a connection that they would make, right? That they're friends, but they're not like very close friends because they just met and she doesn't remember things that much. And like, I did appreciate that, like he tried that and then it didn't work and then they moved on and it was okay, and I thought that was very nice the way it was handled.
For sure. All right. Thank you again so much. This has been awesome. To our listeners, thank you all so much. We have spoken.